collaboration with the Cyprus Mail, this is the Cyprus News Digest with Rosie Haralambous.
Coming up on this week's programme, the row about development in the Akamas Peninsula rumbles on.
As long as you have access to electricity and water, you can demand an exception to the rule, an exception to town planning, and God knows that in Cyprus anybody can get an exception if they know the right people.
And you now have a chance near Limassol to see the island's first underwater, or as it's called, maritime, archaeological park.
What we can see today is an outer harbour, as we call it, so an artificial harbour, a man-made harbour, which was built at the end of the 4th century BC.
According to a headline in the Cyprus Mail earlier this week, the proposed Akamas development plan widely misses the mark of its declared intent. Now, at stake here is a Natura 2000 network and plans to expand what is allowed in the pristine Akamas Peninsula. I'm very confused because the Environment Department has made a report, but the Environment Minister says we can now feel more secure and go ahead. I've asked the Green Party's Effie Xanthou to join me to tell us what is going on. Effie, it said in the report that the revised plan has moved in the right direction, but that significant issues remain. So why would the Agriculture Minister say we can now feel more secure and go ahead with the plans?
Well, if you're asking for my opinion as a representative of the Cyprus Green Party, basically we believe that everything is a setup. They're really trying to push through a town planning situation that will allow building permits in an area that should remain pristine. And the minister is not trying to safeguard this, he's just trying to push things through.
But the Environment Department's environmental impact assessment, now surely they're part of the Ministry of the Environment, aren't they?
Yes, but you have to understand that there are a lot of conflicting, let me say, embedded particular interests in the area, and everybody's lobbying and trying to get their own thing through. So right now we have a Department for Environment that is trying to safeguard whatever they can, but they've already lost half the battle because most of the areas that are now being protected are basically the government land. They haven't been allowed to infringe into private property in most of the areas that should have been protected in Akamas. So we're already only half through the project. So if half of the area that should have been protected isn't supposed to be protected, there is a problem in the new town planning. And we're going to have building permits in areas that should remain pristine to protect the more seriously endangered species a bit further in. So you have like the area and then you have like a big circle around the area to protect it. And we're losing that. We're losing that through the development plans that they're making. And we're losing that through the incremental but slowly increasing through time individual property developments that we're going to have in the area according to the new town planning and what it's going to allow.
So where do we go from here? Because it seems to me reports are going backwards and forwards between town planning and the environmental impact people. And am I right in thinking that they said that a considerable number of development proposals are outside their designated boundaries, which have already been expanded, and they added there does not appear to be a need to add more residential and tourist zones to the levels proposed within the plan?
Yes, well, that's three questions, so let's take one at a time. First of all, we've got the opinion of the Department for Environment right now. We have to wait and see what the Town Planning Department will accept, because it's not a done deal. We're going to have to see what they're going to include in the final draft that they will take to the ministerial committee and have it signed off. Well, before that, actually, it has to go to the Minister of Interior as well. So we're not sure which of the proposed additions or changes that the Department of Environment is suggesting will actually be adhered to. Now, the second problem is that when this process goes through, they're supposed to publish it, and then people can post in their reservations. Now, if you've already posted the town planning and it allows for some sort of development, for instance, on a specific plot of land, and then you have a proposal from an environmental group, for instance, that says that you can't actually allow that in that specific area for so-and-so reason, there is a problem because the people that own that land might actually go and sue the government because it has already kind of granted them some sort of rights and they're going to be taking them back. So one issue is that. The second issue is that the environmental department notes and prerequisites for whatever is going to be happening in Akamas, somebody has to ensure that they're actually going to be adhered to. And that's one of the biggest problems that we have in Cyprus in general, that you don't have inspections, you don't have people that are monitoring any sort of developments or changes that are happening on spot. So we're very fearful that even if every single consultation and note that the Department of Environment has added into this paper is, accepted and included in the final draft that is going to be published, it doesn't mean that it will actually happen. We already have infringements of the situation down in Akamas, and nobody's doing anything about it. The district officer's office seems to have their hands tied. We have constant fires are happening in the area that are changing the landscape as we speak, and every single time that any sort of proposals for change are happening in the news, we get a lot of pressure and lobbying from the locals that feel that if they don't do that, if they don't pressure, they're not going to get anything. So instead of trying to get a sustainable plan and trying to get people working towards a common system that will allow them to have the kind of development that is sustainable and can actually correspond to the needs of the area, both for protection and for financial development of the local populace and other regions as well, we just have this constant yes, no, we agree, we don't agree, and things get prolonged. People are suffering because they are. I'll be the first to attain to and agree to that. And we have no change on the ground. Just because development isn't happening, it doesn't mean that it's safeguarded.
Right, but we have to be fair to the villagers in the remote areas of Akamas.
Yes,
they haven't been allowed to develop as they want to. Now, I think most of us who don't live there certainly don't want more huge hotels, many of which already broke the planning laws. And along the beaches there, the turtle nesting beaches, we've had infringements of people building restaurants and tavernas and so on. And they're still there. Nobody came and knocked them down and said this is illegal. But at the same time, surely the government has enough land to do a swap and to say to villagers who own plots of land within the protected area, we'll take this over as government land and you can have this piece of land in, let's say, I don't know, Limassol or main part of Paphos that's allowed to be developed without impacting the environment.
Well, that's the key issue here, because when the Friends of Akamas and all the other environmentalists were fighting to safeguard that area in the 80s, that was the main goal, that there should be an area that is totally owned by the government, turned into a natural park, into a geosphere park, into trying and making sure that there's an area of Cyprus that remains and retains that character, which is being lost, not only due to development and changes in the way that we live, but also due to the fact that simply that way of life is gone. You don't have people that are easily going to return back to the sustainable way that people were living in the 60s. So we have to find a way where it actually makes sense for the people that want to remain in the area, living in the villages as they are, but safeguarding them. I mean, why is it possible in other countries to have architectural protection for having medieval cities, for instance, that are like a huge tourist attraction because they are different than what the rest of the country or the rest of Europe has to offer? That's what we're trying to convince people in the area to be able to accept. I mean, they're bringing over the urbanization problems that are striking the whole of the island as a way of trying to convince everybody that basically the way that the Cyprus government has treated them has destroyed their villages. Well, I'm sorry, but it's most of the rural villages in the areas that are mountainous or semi-mountainous that have the same exact problems. Urbanization is huge, and we won't be able to stop it if all we do is just give you the right to make a few more holiday houses or hotels. What we will be able to do is make sure that you have a living in that area, that you have a particular protection and rights as a local resident, a bit more than anybody else in other parts of the island because of the special status that you have. But, governments kept promising that they can give them more because of election processes, and we keep going back and forth on that.
Now, let's talk about the development that has, I think, already been approved, and I'm not sure if that's right, for a road to go into that Natura area in order for people to access it. And along the way, grab a coffee, there'll be toilets, there'll be, again, tavernas or rest houses or whatever. That surely is going to have an impact on the whole region because there'll be electricity and other infrastructure there.
Yeah, well, it's twofold. On the one hand, by creating these new roads and more and better access for people with regular vehicles, which was not the case up to now at least, it means that you have a lot more people visiting. Now, supposedly, we wanted to have more people visiting, but if you're creating 7 different rest houses, we're talking about restaurants, bathing facilities, and toilets for people to visit, that basically takes away from the sustainable ecotourism model that we've been trying to convince people in the area to accept, because we're driving them away from the actual villages. We're not giving them, easy access and options towards ecotourism or agrotourism. We're just taking them in the middle of nowhere and offering them a seaside bar like you would find, for instance, in Limassol or Yanapa or Protaras. You're going to have sunbeds and umbrellas in the sand. You're going to have villagers trying to up the number of sunbeds and umbrellas. But the actual villages, like the people that would have been working restaurants, that would have had bed and breakfasts, that would have been selling locally produced or whatever it is that they would have been trying to sell towards tourists, will get no foot traffic towards their areas and no replication of that model that we were discussing before. That's the one problem. The second problem is that by creating roads and giving access to electricity and water supply, it basically means that the plots of land on the left and right of these roads are going to be developed one way or another. As long as you have access to electricity and water, you can demand an exception to the rule, an exception to town planning, and God knows that in Cyprus anybody can get an exception if they know the right people. And that's the kind of problems that we're going to have. I'll remind people of how we have destroyed the sea caves in Pega. The sea caves are right on the cusp of a Natura 2000 protected sea area because of the Monachos fields, and yet they have actually been approved. They've got final approval for the holiday houses that were built illegally, in our understanding, at least towards EU law, in the Pega area. This is going to happen all over the island if we allow any sort of town planning to bring over these amenities into the rural and total pristine landscape of Akamas.
Yeah, and I think we should mention, should we not, that we're in the fire season at the moment, and it's well documented in other areas of the mountains, for example, that fires very often start in or around dwellings that are pretty well in the middle of nowhere. It can be a spark from some work being done or something else. So this dotting around the landscape of even single houses is a fire hazard, isn't it?
Yes, it is. And even the actual power lines are a fire hazard. I'll remind people that the huge fires that we had in the virgin forests of Cyprus in 2012, it seems like that fire actually started from the electricity wires that were not maintained as they should have, and they were overseeing the forest area. And then people saw the sparks, and then you had a huge forest fire. It took almost a week to put that off. Besides the fact that obviously you're very right that any sort of human activity will increase the possibility of a forest fire. I mean, just the garbage that is going to be thrown away in these areas, as we've seen in most of the areas in Cyprus, are going to be a fire hazard. Any piece of glass strategically positioned could possibly create a fire, as far as we understand from all the training that we're receiving on how to deal with forest fires.
It's all very depressing. Let's follow with interest and keep the pressure up. I presume that if this is going to a public consultation, we will be informed so that we can say something. Where would we find out?
Well, hopefully, because up to now we've had the adamant refusal of the Ministry of Interior of actually bringing out the plans, informing people of what is being planned so that you can have a truly public consultation. We're only seeing bits and pieces and definitely no map on the ground to be able to assess and to be able to ensure that any irrelevant information that needs to be taken into account by the authorities that are dealing with this right now has been forwarded to them. Because you would assume that people would be very interested in dealing with this situation and want to know the truth. But like I said, the lobbying from specific individuals and specific groups will not allow this. And as we understand, it's not only about protecting a specific area where you have a specific species residing. It's about protecting a peninsula as a whole that will be able to sustain itself both financially and also environmentally. And that also includes the sea area. I mean, I dare anybody to just go around the Akamas area right now and see how many yachts, private boats are coming into the coves of Akamas, even though this is strictly forbidden due to the fact that you have the turtle laying season right now. And I'll remind people that we had 3 years ago, we had that huge ruckus happening because of the boat that came right onto Lara Beach, brought people out. Kids were just, digging into the sand with their sand shovels or whatever. And we had the same minister that we have now saying that he is going to be extremely strict on how to deal with this. And then this year we have the Deputy Ministry for Tourism actually promoting videos of these boats and private yachts going into the Akamas area, into the pristine areas of the water, and promoting it as a tourist attraction.
That's Effie Xanthul from the Green Party talking there. And how many weeks now have we been talking about the proposed Akamas development plan?
This is the Cyprus News Digest with Rosie Haralambous.
At the beginning of July, Amathus Harbour was opened. Now, you might wonder what significance that has. Well, the fact is that it's underwater. This is the first maritime archaeological park in Cyprus. It's a very ancient harbour with a lot of history. Joining us to tell us about this exciting project is Associate Professor Stella Demestika from the University of Cyprus, who coordinated the creation of the park. So, Stella, first of all, where did the idea come from that we should have an underwater archaeological park?
Oh, that's a very good question, Rosie. Well, the idea is that the public is entitled to be able to visit archaeological remains either on land or underwater. With underwater remains, archaeological remains, there is the difficulty of accessibility. Not everybody can go underwater, that is. So the people that worked for a bigger project, which was a project for the creation of diving trails at protected areas in Greece and Cyprus, they had the idea that the harbour of Amathus was a very good site to create such a park. So create a place where people can learn about underwater remains and be able to visit them.
Right, now tell us a bit about the history of Amathus itself, because there is, of course, on land an archaeological site, and it does have a very important role to play in our ancient history, doesn't it?
Oh, certainly. Amathus was one of the ancient Cypriot polities, or they are also known as kingdoms, and it was a very important one. And part of its importance lies with its access to the water, to the sea. It was a city that was connected to the most important seaborne trade networks of antiquity, and thus it has always had a harbor. And the harbor of Amathus has a very special history because, as we know, Amathus had a natural harbor, that is, natural bay, which was protected from the winds. But today we cannot see it because it's silted, so it's dry land. What we can see today is an outer harbor, as we call it, so an artificial harbor, a man-made harbor, which was built at the end of the 4th century BC. Most probably, we're not certain about this, but most probably by the successors of Alexander the Great, the Adochi, as they are known in Greek. So one of them, we're not sure if it was Demetrius, Polyarchites, or Ptolemy, decided to build a big artificial harbor for its fleet at Amathus.
I've seen a map, and I want you to sort of talk me through that map, if you will, because I think, am I right in thinking that you don't actually have to dive, because a lot of people can't, of course, to see some of these ruins? You can snorkel, but can you see anything from the walkway above?
No, you can't. That was the tricky part of the whole exercise to create the park, because we had to introduce the public to a monument that they could not see, unless, of course, they are in the water. Yes, you're right that one doesn't need to dive because it's too shallow. It's deepest part to a 0.5 meters, so you don't have to dive, especially in Cyprus with this excellent visibility we have in the sea. You can just snorkel with a mask from the surface of the water and you can see everything.
And is it open to everybody? I mean, if you're going swimming in the area, I see that there's a ticket office. So does it mean that you have to have permission and buy a ticket to go and see this?
No, not at all. The harbour remains where have been and still are open to everyone to visit. Now, at the ticket office is for the archaeological site on land, at the agora of the ancient city. But we put our first information board outside that ticket office so that people that go visit the archaeological site, they find out that there is more to see. They walk toward the coast.
Okay, so they can take a walk up the hill of Amathus, see all that there is to see on land, and then pop on a snorkel mask and go and have a dip and see what's underwater.
Exactly. And it's important for everybody that does it to have a look at the information boards that we installed on the pathway along the coast, and as you said, one outside the ticket office. And of course, we're very proud of the app, the Amathus Harbour application that anyone can download on their tablets or smartphones, mobile phones, and there they can learn a lot about the site, and also they can listen, they can create their own trail and explore the coast, and they can use the audio guide so they can listen as they walk and understand better the landscape, that it has now changed so much so we cannot see the harbour.
Right, let me ask you about that app, because is it possible, if you download it, to have a sort of virtual tour of the underwater site?
Yes, not only the underwater though. I want to explain something here that I think it's important. The reason that we call this park maritime park instead of underwater park is because it has an underwater but also a terrestrial component. And this is important because a harbour, every harbour, even modern ones, do have a sea part and a land part. there is no harbor that is not associated with the coast. So we want to show people that they need to understand the coast, they need to understand the connection of the harbor with the ancient city in order to be able to understand its importance, but also how it looked like in antiquity. And an important part of this narrative is what we call the coastal changes, because of the climatic changes, but other phenomena like earthquakes, the coast changes all the time. So the coast in antiquity was not where the coast is now. And one has to understand it in order to have the full picture of how the ancient harbor was.
It's all very fascinating. Now, where can people find out more, see the pictures and possibly download the app?
Exactly. There are even 3D models that they can see, also that to understand the relief of the coast and how the coast is connected with, the coast actually connects, as I said, the city of Amathus, which is now behind the modern motorway and the coast. And this motorway has artificially divided the harbor from the city, whereas in antiquity, you understand that it was a united landscape.
Yeah, I want to know where people can look online to see all this information if they've missed any of it and get that app.
The app can be downloaded from the platforms people use to download their apps like Google Play or App Store. And it's, of course, free. I mean, you can download it on your phone as you download any other app. You don't have to go to a specific webpage to do that, other than what I just said.
So that's the Amathus Harbour app. And what about general information and photographs online?
Well, the app provides everything. There is a lot of information and photographs through the app. You can find it. Otherwise, one can go to our webpage at the University of Cyprus and find out actually a summary of what is on the app.
So there'll be a lot of virtual visitors, no doubt. Professor Stella Domestica, thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity.
Keep up to date with events in Cyprus and around the world with the Cyprus News Digest.
And before we go, a look at some of the other stories making the headlines this week. The Labour Minister, Kyriakos Kouchios, said earlier this week that he will submit a final proposal on the national minimum wage at meetings with stakeholders due to be held yesterday and today. This will be welcome news for those who are suffering from the increased prices that are happening pretty well all over the world. But it's not yet clear how the median salary will be determined and whether it will be based on the Cyprus Statistical Service figures or the higher ones from the EU. And let's end on a happy note. Melanie, a rare black female flamingo, has returned to the Akrotiri Salt Lake for the 5th time in 7 years. The British bases announced on Thursday that the flamingo, which suffers from melanism, that's a genetic irregularity which turns it a dark brown or black, had caused a media storm all over the world when she first arrived in 2015. The manager of the Akrotiri Environmental Education Centre said he was thrilled to see that she'd returned again this year on her 10th birthday. Well, that about wraps up this edition of the Cyprus News Digest. Many thanks for your company. Hope you'll join me next week. Till we meet again, take care and God bless. Bye-bye now.